The mass shootings in Texas and Ohio are part of a pattern of gun violence in America. This year alone, there have been at least 255 mass shootings and at least 273 people have been killed. More than 1,000 others have been hurt.
Just let that number sink in.
I know.
255. In a report published just last month, the U.S. Secret Service National Threat Assessment Center took a look at mass shootings in America over the last 2 years. It identifies behaviors, motives, and triggers leading to attacks in public places. So joining us now from Washington is Lina Alathari. She's chief of NTAC. Lina, here's what the FBI put out in response to these crimes. The attack in El Paso underscores a threat posed by domestic violent extremists and perpetrators of hate crimes. Are hate crimes and domestic terror on the rise in America? That's the question.
Good morning, Vlad. Thank you for having me. I just want to start off first, though, by saying that on behalf of the men and women of the Secret Service, I really offer our condolences to the families of the victims and the communities impacted by this tragedy. In response to your question, as you see from our reports, you know, the Secret Service National Threat Assessment Center has been studying targeted violence for the last 20 years. The agency has an unparalleled expertise in identifying individuals who may pose a risk of violence, assessing their risk, and then mitigating that. And what we've done is taken this model and adapted it to prevent these attacks in the community. So the last 2 years, we wanted to look at mass attacks because it is such a topic right now. And we want to find out why are they happening and who's perpetrating them, and are there avenues for prevention? And as you can see from the report, regardless of the type of individual that carried out this attack, there is really no one profile. But there are common themes that we're seeing in their backgrounds. And in terms of the motive, some are ideological in nature. In fact, in the last report, two were. One was in white supremacist beliefs, anti-Semitic, and the other one was anti-abortion. In the last report, we saw similar themes. However, the majority of individuals who carry out this attack are doing it in retaliation for some grievance, some kind of perceived wrong that they felt has been done to them.
Okay, so this is pretty interesting. Though we're focusing on the weekend, there was another similar mass shooting. It was in California before that, and it's sort of gone by the wayside with all of these headlines. But in those cases, we're talking about all three male shooters. They're between the ages of 19 and 24. I believe they're all white, but I'm not sure. So, you talk about how what your group has really focused on, part of what your group is focused on is figuring out what this sort of profile is. Is there a reason why men in this age group are particularly susceptible to the influences that may lead to gun violence?
I can tell from the last few incidents that they are in their 20s based on the reporting from the media. I have not investigated these cases personally myself. Obviously, their law enforcement is on the ground and investigating. But I can tell you that in our reports for the mass attacks, we see that the youngest was 15, the oldest was 64 in this report. They varied by age groups. And similarly, last year and this year, the actual age, average age was 37. So you can't just say, oh, someone's in their 20s or someone's in their 40s. I think that would be a bit misleading, and we don't want to have a profile that only people in their 20s would commit an attack such as this. What we want to focus on, though, are the behaviors. You can see from our reports that nearly every single perpetrator of a mass attack in the year 2018 made concerning communications prior to their attacks. They also engaged in other concerning behavior that elicited the worry and fear of those around them. And that included escalating anger and aggression, social media posts with violent content, paranoia, erratic behavior, stalking, harassing. So what we want to tell the general public is we want to be able to have systems in place that can identify these concerning behaviors, assess them, and be able to come up with intervention strategies. What we talk to our own agents about how we protect the president, we talk to others in the community when we're doing training. Early intervention is key.
So, Lina, one of the questions that I have, given the manifesto allegedly written by the individual who killed our fellow citizens in El Paso, is this idea of white nationalist terrorism. Now, I was surprised when John Miller, who's the chief of the NYPD's counterterrorism department, appeared on CBS this morning today and said that the federal government has never actually designated a group, an American group, to be a terrorist threat. And I was curious about that. I even asked him about the KKK, and he said, nope, not at the federal level. There have been groups, the Southern Poverty Law Center, et cetera, that have designated some groups here in the United States as terrorist threats, but we've never done it at the federal level. Should there be a change to that? Because my question then becomes, could federal resources be allocated, the FBI, in particular, the Secret Service, in investigating when somebody posts a manifesto on 8chan or 4chan to figure out what's going on there?
What I can tell you, Vlad, I'll leave some of those issues to policymakers, which I am not, and obviously DOJ for the criminal prosecutions. But what I can tell you, just from the Secret Service perspective, is that for us, we want to be able to identify these individuals. And this is why community and the general public need to be aware of what the concerning behaviors are. As I said, regardless of whether it's ideological or some other motive, they are out there. They are eliciting concern, and we need to be able to identify them so that we can intervene. For us as an agency, I will tell you, prosecution is not our main goal. Our main goal is prevention, preventing attacks against our protected interest, but also attacks in the community.
Lina, before we let you go, what are we doing in terms of trying to understand? You know, when I was growing up, if somebody wrote a manifesto, it would be on paper. It would be a hard copy of that manifesto written perhaps on a computer or perhaps on a typewriter, but generally not something that could be seen by millions of people on a message board. So what kind of resources do we have as a country in place for looking through? Because we're talking about hundreds and hundreds of arcane web pages and chat rooms that must be, in addition to dealing with an existential threat from outside nefarious forces, now we're talking about one internally. Do we have the resources to keep up with that stuff?
I think what I can tell you that states and law enforcement and other public safety professionals are really doing a lot to try to be able to identify these things. I know there are state reporting apps. One of the first one, if you want to talk in just in generalities, and specifically maybe related to targeted school violence, was after Columbine, Safe to Tell. And that app gets thousands of reports a year from people who are seeing things digitally. They're seeing it on Snapchat and some of the other ones, especially the ones that the children are using. So we know that states are doing more to encourage reporting of information. For us as an agency, the same thing. A lot of the information we get are from concerned citizens who see these things posted online. So you want to talk about people need to, see something, say something. The Department of Homeland Security has been preaching that mantra forever, but we don't need to just see something and say something. Whoever is getting the information needs to do something, and that's incumbent on all public safety professionals, not just law enforcement.
Lina Alathari, you are the chief of the U.S. Secret Service National Threat Assessment Center. Thank you so much for taking time to speak to us and to our audience on what I'm sure is a very difficult period for your agency, but we really appreciate it.
Thank you so much, Vlad. Thank you for having me.